So for everybody to follow along with, I have a presentation that I'm going to be speaking to and using as kind of the anchor point for this lesson. So that I'm streaming right now. So please come in and watch the stream so you can see the things that I'm talking about. Um, if at any point you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or message in general chat, whichever you are most comfortable with. Um, I have a learning disability, so reading all the questions in chat can get overwhelming if there are so many coming in at once. So just be patient. If I miss your question, I will do my best to answer everything that I can as I go. Got a couple people in stream. I'll just wait a couple moments to make sure that everybody that has a chance to get in that would like to get in. Okay. So this class is going to be a beginner's guide to teaching, and we're going to be talking specifically about lesson planning. So my first thing is why teach? Well, teaching is a very rewarding experience that allows you the chance to engage in amped guard with your peers. It allows you to pass down sometimes that tribal knowledge, those things, and that kind of implicit teaching, those skills that you don't think that you need to teach somebody, but you do. We all needed to learn how to tie our shoes at one point, and I know that sounds very simple, but it's a good way to think about it. There's all sorts of skills and all sorts of things that are available to teach, and there are skills that we have that we don't even realize we have sometimes that we are qualified to teach and can use to pass on to the next generation. But Alistair, it's so hard. Teaching can be a very overwhelming experience, that is for sure. There's a lot that can go into it from behind the scenes. There's a lot of prep work to do to really make a successful lesson, and that's kind of what we're going to be breaking down today is those tips and tricks for that prep period, that lesson planning that you do behind the scenes before you get to your class that can make everything run smoothly and can really cut down that anxiety and that overwhelming sensation when it comes to teaching, because once you know how to structure everything and once you know how to put everything in its place, things really flow very smoothly with teaching, and it can be so much fun and really enjoyable for both you and your students. So we're going to start my class with some learning goals, or another language to use for this is takeaways. In education, there's a lot of jargon that I might say, so words that you may be unfamiliar with. So if at any point you're confused by what I'm saying or anything like that, please, I'm going to try to give other ways to say it, but ask for clarification and I'll try to explain it as best I can. Um, so the learning goals for our lesson, um, our learning goals is our learning goal is to take away an understanding about teaching and feel more confident about teaching in the future. That's what I want you as the student to take away from this class. How am I going to do this as the teacher, and how do I want you to feel like I've been successful? So, this is kind of your reflection, even on me as the teacher of your class. I wrote it as an I statement. So, it's I understand how to structure my lessons so that I can be more prepared for the classes I am going to teach. If you feel you can say that successfully, you have met your learning goal. You have met what we have been trying to achieve in this class. So, that's how we're going to start. That's how we're going to proceed. That's kind of our roadmap for this class. Let's start by having a conversation about lesson planning. So, a brief description about this is lesson planning is the act of taking the time to think about your class before you teach it. It involves spending the time to think about how you're going to fill your class, so the time that you've been given. So, in this particular instance, Adventure Academy often gives you an hour to teach your class. So, what are you going to do for that hour? How are you going to navigate the class, and what are the things you want to accomplish? You typically have to prepare the structure of your lesson beforehand. You want to prepare the content of the lesson, what you're actually going to have. And also, most importantly, you got to have those materials prepared. So you're going to structure your time. That's typically time management. What am I going to teach and when? The content is the extra stuff, kind of your meat and potatoes there, right? What is actually going to be happening and how are we going to do it? And then your materials is those accessory pieces to really enhance that lesson experience for your students, right? It can be hands on, it can be a digital material like my PowerPoint. There are different kinds of materials, and we're going to be talking about the different options we have available to us as we go through this lesson. Let's start having a brief conversation about lesson structure. Uh, what makes a lecture different than a workshop, for example? Anybody from the audience? Any ideas on what would make a lecture different from a workshop? Huh. Which one would be hands on?
Workshop would be hands-on.
Yeah. So if you're
Often,
in,
often workshops also require more materials and materials for individual people more than just yourself as well.
correct. Yeah. Those are all excellent points, right? So if you're thinking about your lesson structure, you want to be asking yourself a kind of question like, what kind of lesson am I going to be teaching? Am I going to be sitting and talking to a group of people for an hour? Or do I want them to actually get involved hands on doing something? And that is also going to change how you use your time. If I'm running a workshop, if I'm running a sewing class, how much of my time is dedicated to demonstration versus construction time, right? I have an hour to get 8 to 12 people to sew wrap pants. That's a lot of time. That's not a lot of time to get a big thing done, right? So I have to figure out how to budget my time accordingly and how much I'm going to have pre prepared beforehand, right? Um, a good way to think of this is if you're doing a painting class, how much of your time are you going to be spent talking to your class about different brush strokes, about how to put the piece together, and how much time are you going to give them to do it themselves if they're following the steps independently, or is everything directed by yourself? Right? There are so many different lesson structures that it gives us a lot of freedom as the teacher to be prepared and kind of have that control that we need to steer the class appropriately, right? Having structure to your lesson provides comfort for our own anxieties, but it also really helps our students' anxieties. Yes, auditory versus kinesthetic learning is a great way to think about lesson structure and the difference between lecture and workshop. You're going to get a lot more learners that learn from an auditory standpoint, from listening and digesting information. They're going to get more value out of a lecture. Where kinesthetic learners are going to get more value out of a workshop because it's that hands on experience to reinforce the learning for them, right? So, lesson structure for me comes a lot at time management and organizing your time. Um, So, how long is your lesson? How long do you have? That's probably one of the first questions I ask myself because it's a very important one for the rest of knowing what I can accomplish in my teaching, knowing what I have the students' time for. How much time will it complete to take this activity? This is a really hard question to answer as a teacher because you have to remember you're likely a expert in the thing you're teaching or very knowledgeable in it. And so it's Morden, are you speaking or am I just seeing voice activity?
I'm not speaking, sorry.
Okay, sorry, your mic is coming on and I just wanted to make sure you didn't have a question. Uh, how much time will it take? So typically, it's a good rule of thumb is to at least double the amount of time that it takes to do something for you to do for somebody that you're teaching how to do it. So if you're teaching a construction based class or a workshop on plastic dipping or creating a sword or flat blade construction, you're going to want to be able to at least double the time because you're going to be working with students that are unfamiliar or uncomfortable with the materials that you're working with. So they're going to be navigating it for the first time. And so that really adds more time as you answer questions, be around to troubleshoot the problems that are going around. And you've got to build that time into your lesson. You got to be prepared ahead of time for things to take longer. Um, what happens if they finish early or late, right? So this kind of goes on with what I was talking about earlier that when we are teaching our lesson and things go really quickly because we're really excited, the students are really getting it, things are really jiving and things are really going, you could finish early. Or if you're running behind because the activity that you chose is too high of an expectation for where your class is at, they may finish late because you didn't realize all these things that might happen. And that's great opportunity for learning for you as a teacher. It can a lot of our time in lesson planning, we want to reflect back on the courses we teach and think about these things. What could I add or what do I need to take away to make this a better experience for our students? Because we're trying to structure an authentic learning period for them. We are trying to organize our classes and amp guard so that they walk away learning something, right? We really want to facilitate student first thinking. Um, Another way to think of structure is filling the void. Holy cow, is an hour a long time when you're the only one talking? It can really feel like a big thing. So, what are the most crucial things you need to prepare for? Honestly, my answer to this is transition time. So transitions can be as simple as what Rajavia did to start this class, where she informed everybody what was happening. She passed the stage over to myself, and I continued giving you a flow of how to get started and getting us organized onto the stream, giving wait time for people to come into the stream so that they could see what I was doing, and allowing that to fill my time. Because I want my students to be ready to learn and focused. So I'm giving them transition time at the beginning of my lesson to come in, leave what has happened in the last 10, 15 minutes before they got to my class at the door so that they can be ready to learn. Because they're going to bring in with them whatever energy they had before the class, right? So that transition into your learning, you got to be ready to take the reins and give control to your class. So um, many of us in elementary school and teachers college and stuff like that, we learn the clapping tricks that we all probably roll our eyes at and think, oh, they did that to me in elementary school. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You can also just do what I do often in my classes is, okay, everybody, can I get your attention, please? Just speaking loud and putting your presence into the room will draw eyes to you and get things steering in the direction that you want. You are kind of the captain of the ship. You're charting the course for your class for the next period of time. So you got to be ready for transitions. Uh, Also, be warned that transitions can be deadly. Transition is any time in between activity. So people arriving to class, moving them around to show them something or them participating. If you're running a workshop, you're likely to have a lot more transition time than if you're doing a lecture, right? My transition time was the simple getting started, having people come in, and if we're having more of a discussion, I might have to transition from one conversation into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, right? If you're doing a workshop on needle felting, if you're doing a workshop on painting, you're going to have a lot of different transition periods that you have to be aware of and be able to control. So, often a good way to think of this is less is more. Well, at the same time, give things in chunks. Break things down for your students so you don't need to have too many transitions and take up that valuable time that you have. Um, Let me think of a better way to explain this, that you want to have the transition go smoothly. So you want to have things organized ahead of time and know where you're going. So you don't want everybody to transition to a table to watch you do something and then all have to go back to their own tables where they're then going to do it. You could stand at the front and give a demonstration and show them, or walk around to each group as they're learning and doing the activity, showing and demonstrating the skills that they will need as they go and reinforcing that learning hands on, right? It cuts away some of that transition time and can make you feel as the teacher that you've got a little bit more control and a little better grasp of things that are going on in your class, which is really, I think, something that helps with the anxiety of teaching and getting overwhelmed by it is feeling like you have things prepared ahead of time. Having students move around the space is a time killer. I'm going to tell you now when you need to have people move around a space, and it may be different because I work with young kids, but I've from my friends that work in high school, in classes that I've seen working with adults, even in university, it takes a lot of time to get people to move around a space and to get themselves in groups if you need them to do a group activity or things like that. So account for that. Give yourself more time than you need. It is better to be early than to be overtime, right? Going back to that conversation about ending early or ending late, it's better to have a little too much than not enough of your own substance to use in your lesson. Um, are there any questions about the structure of a lesson? Good habits or good things and how to structure a lesson? Any ideas that people want to workshop or talk about that they might want to teach and understand different structure ideas for that? Okay, I'm gonna keep moving forward. So the next thing we're gonna be talking about is the content of the lesson, which is kind of the biggest part of a lesson. I find people often struggle the most with knowing how to put the lesson together and figuring out what to put in it. They know that a lesson often flows like a presentation, like we've learned in classes, in school, but they don't know how to put it all together in a way that makes it flow properly. So class should have a flow to it, as I have mentioned. Um, this typically goes beginning, middle to end, or different language to use for this is learning, trying, consolidation. So you're going to start by teaching your students the key information they needed to know for what you're going to be talking about. I started my lesson by telling you what lesson planning is and giving you a definition and the criteria for how you can try to be successful, the things you want to think about for it. Trying in this kind of lesson, a more lecture style, there isn't a big time to try. There won't be a lot of that hands on trying, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for trying in this lesson. That comes through our oral conversations, it comes through breaking down the three different parts of lesson planning and being asking critical questions about how are we going to do this and how can we make this work for all of our lessons, all the things that we want to teach, because there's so many things we can teach and we want to have fun doing so. And consolidation is rounding up that learning and talking to them and sharing with them again the skills that they have walked away with, right? So if you were teaching a painting class, you might tell all your students, remember when you're blending in the colors, use these kind of strokes, or when you're uh, want to reinforce those safety tips or those tips for success for whatever they're working on, so that when they leave the classroom, they are thinking about that in the forefront and it really sticks that learning all together, right? So we got our beginning, middle, end. Our lesson planning content should be student centered thinking. We want to think about our students that are coming to our class rather than thinking about ourselves as the teacher. And I think this is often a trap people, pardon me, fall into with their teaching. We often think about skills in relative to how easy or hard they are for ourselves to complete versus skills for somebody that is new at something. So, um, when we think about our class and we think about what we want to put in, we typically want our students to enjoy our classes and learn something new, right? What materials do they need? These sorts of student focused questions of what materials do they and I need to teach the class, that's going to fill up my content. If I'm teaching a sword construction class, I need to think about bringing scissors. I need to think about, in a lecture, if I was in person, I'd bring pens and papers for my students. um, Not because I would expect them to take notes, but if they want to, I want to have the materials available for them. I don't want them to be struggling to look through their bag that they brought to see if they have a paper or a random spell book that they can rip a page out of. I want to have that available for them. So I want to be an opening and inviting experience for them where they're not having more anxiety because of how I'm teaching, right? That's why we think about our students when we're planning our lesson. Um, we want to think about accessibility in our content. So when we're thinking about accessibility, there's a lot to think about. So think about what kind of students may struggle with this class and how can you adjust your approach to make it more accessible. A lecture style has a big struggle to it in that a lot of students that are visual and kinesthetic don't always take a whole lot away. So I have tried my best to include something that is visual to help compensate for some of that weakness in this visual aid of my presentation. But what kind of classes often struggle with accessibility? I think are workshops. People don't always think about the physical limitations that some students have that can make workshops or stick skill activities difficult for some participants that are still looking to get into that area of learning. Uh, we talked earlier in the color class about different kinds of participation. We talked about a wizard that was in a wheelchair using their spell balls to great effectiveness, and I thought that was a great way to think about accessibility. How do we bring people in and bring in their skills to affect what we're teaching? Right. As a teacher, accessibility can often mean adjusting on the fly. You're not always going to be able to think about everything in advance, and that's okay. Don't let that eat you up. Don't let that chew away at your conscience if you get there and you didn't think about something. But you need to be ready to tackle it in the moment. You need to be comfortable being flexible and being adjustable to how your students are responding to your teaching and to their needs. Because we are ultimately here trying to help them. That is a big part of teaching and what we want to uh, pass on through our lessons and be as teachers of all kind in amp guard and out of amp guard. We want to be approachable and kind and courteous. And finally, part of our content, think of your learning goal, go back to it. So I talked about learning goals or takeaways. Um, and I think this is going to be where we'll spend the next big part of our time is on the next slide, talking about how to properly structure a learning goal that you can anchor your whole lesson around, right? Uh, when you have your learning goal, when you know what you want people to take away from your class, it's really then just about structuring what you're going to put in there to make that possible, right? It's a really, it's kind of like a life hack for teaching. If you know what you want them to walk away with, eh, now let's figure out how we're going to do that. That's the easy. The hard part is often figuring out the key point you want people to walk away with. And did you meet your learning goal? That you kind of want to reflect as you're planning the content of your lesson. If somebody new who had never touched this information before was coming into the lesson, would they be able to understand it? Did I do a thorough enough job explaining it? So now we're going to talk about a backwards design approach. And I have a cat riding a bicycle because I thought it was cute. Um, so the backwards design approach means thinking about your learning goal and success criteria in a lesson and working backwards. And it can really help with your lesson planning because if I know I want to teach and I want my students to walk away knowing how to make a belt favor, what am I really teaching my class in teaching somebody how to make a belt favor? There's a lot of different skills, and I want to see if you all might be able to throw in some of your own ideas of what things people might learn from learning how to sew a belt favor.
Well, knowing how to sew to start with.
That's a good one. So knowing how to sew, what else are we teaching when we teach belt favoring?
Possibly you'll make a pattern for your favor, so also a little bit of pattern making, though it's pretty simple.
Pattern making. Also how to read the pattern,
Yep,
right?
yep.
That's its own skill, right? Not everybody comes into sewing knowing how to read patterns and understand what they're showing.
Also, depending on how you're doing the belt favor, it could be applique, you could be painting with like fabric paint, whatever that ends up being, possibly embroidery,
Yeah,
whatever that skill is.
that 100%. I think you hit the nail on the head there, Whipsy, with what you said. Each kind of material that you work with will teach students different skills, right? So to have a broad strokes class calling it belt favoring might be a little misleading. Um, uh, but we might say we're going to teach students how to paint heraldries using acrylic paint on uh, a piece of broadcloth. That's what we're going to, or fabric paint and broadcloth. That's going to be our lesson materials, and what we're going to be teaching students and making students think about is those tips for success on all kinds of fabric painting. Well, you need to be aware of the tension of your fabric, right? That's going to affect how your painting dries and how the quality of your artwork turns out, right? There's a lot of hidden skills that come along with any final result that when you break them down and you really kind of think about them, the lesson can fill itself, right? If I'm teaching a belt favor lesson, I'm going to start by showing examples of different kinds of belt favors, maybe a fabric painted one, maybe a appliqued one, and maybe a sewed one. And maybe I'll show my students how to make 2 or 3 of them and talk about their different pros and cons, right? Because each kind of material and each style of working with them has different pros and cons. So we're going to start with our objective in mind. What do we want our students to be able to do or be able to say they can do at the end of our lesson? Then we think about our pre knowledge. If you want them to make a sword, well, they need to know the sword construction rules. If you want them to craft, they need to know what the tools and techniques are called and the safety protocol that go along with that craft, right? These are skills that you often know as the teacher and those things that you have in your mind. But if you really want that learning to stick and you want our students to be able to make that sword outside of the class and not have to come back to you to rely on it, we want to teach those pre knowledge things, those hidden curriculum, we often call them in teaching. Those skills that you don't realize you have until you have them. Right? It's like riding a bike. Uh, Tied in the cat, didn't I? Right? You don't always know how to ride a bike right away as a kid, but once you learn, it's easy to hop back on, right? And we want to promote those kind of skills in our classes. We want those hop on skills. If I know how to pin fabric and read a pattern and take measurements for a pattern, I can figure out on my own how to run the fabric through the machine if you've already showed me once or twice. And now I know how to sew. But I know how to sew more than just maybe a belt favor. But that's how you taught me, was using a belt favor first. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Are there any questions at this moment? I know I'm going a little quickly. There's a lot of things that I want to get through and cover, but I want to make sure that I take the time to answer any questions that you have at any time. This is for you, and I really want you to make the most of this opportunity. Excellent. Okay. Good to know we're all good. Let's talk about materials now. So materials are your building blocks of your lesson. The things that are gonna really enhance and add that wow factor. They're your accessories, they're your bling bling, whatever you may want to call them. Um, and materials can be visuals. I saw a lot of teachers today teaching, some of them teaching with visuals, some of them without. And I think a simple PowerPoint or a simple video, even of yourself, or some diagrams, or having a schedule for your class to refer to, is really helpful for lowering your class's anxiety levels, right? We as the teacher benefit from having them. We have an anchor point for ourselves, for our talking, and for the guiding of the lesson, and our students have something to ground them. There are visual learners make up the most popular learning style uh, in in the world. Actually, uh, or auditory is second, and kinesthetic is the lowest. But that doesn't mean we don't consider them, and we want to include them in our classes. So we want to make sure that we have something there for all of our students to interact with to make this learning opportunity for them. Um, if you need help with understanding how to make a proper PowerPoint, or you want to learn how to make YouTube videos or good diagrams, I have a large repertoire of different uh, websites and things like that that I've been given through Teachers College that I'm more than happy to share with you to make things really great and interactive and fun for your classes. Um, Materials is often when you think about handouts, so materials the students are going to be taking away with them. Um, if you're doing a hands-on arts focus class, who is funding the materials, right? In Amped Guard, this can get a little expensive if you're trying to fund a class and all that kind of stuff. But you can take the initiative and try to organize a fundraiser with your park if there is interest for a maybe expensive class where you do a silent auction at your mid-range with run with the understanding that some of the proceeds are going to go towards making an arrow making class or a tabard making class, so that way you get the funds to teach these skills that you have, but you don't necessarily have the finances to fund giving everybody a tabard or buying arrows for everybody on your own. So those costs can really eat up, and it's not the responsibility of the teacher, but it is in that you got to think about things ahead of time and plan how you're going to get the materials that you need for your students, right? We often have these things already as the teacher, but we have to make sure we have them for the students as well. Um, you want to think about the things you can have prepared, ready to save on your transition time. Um, Materials and things like that when you get there are sometimes the last thing we think about is filling out our PowerPoint presentations or actually uploading the video that we have or need to YouTube. And I would say materials are probably something I think about first and get out of the way first. Because once you have the materials ready and able to go, your lesson is typically pick up and go. You're able to organize, throw it together, and go. Wunjo, I actually really like seeing him carry around all his baskets of all of the things he needs for his lesson. He had big whiteboards and everything last year at Adventure Academy, and those are all great materials that he was ready and he had set up and organized in his corner even before his lesson. He just had it set up ready to go, so that way when it was time to teach, he could just turn on that switch and get going. So having those materials ready really helps with that anxiety piece of teaching. Uh, and sometimes it's hard to think about the materials you're going to want for a lesson. I think that's where a lot of teachers can get hung up of I'm teaching this, do I really need a diagram about how to make a crossfade properly or how to do a high cross? Maybe you do. Maybe you want to go out into your backyard with somebody and have them take pictures of you in proper posture and in the proper swing technique so that somebody that's a visual learner, even though they're watching you, can look through that diagram and have their learning be consolidated. They can take that away with them so they never forget. Even if they haven't played AmpGuard for 5 years, they can come and look at it and be like, oh, I know how to do this now. Yeah. Right? Visuals can be simple and be very, very effective. Materials can be simple and be very, very effective, I think. Right? That's why I kind of like this picture of the building blocks. Right? We've all made a house out of bricks and still understood it's a house. Right? I wanted to take some time to talk about teaching tips and continue to answer any questions that people have as we go. I'm sorry that I talk quickly. It is part of who I am. And if you need me to slow down or go over anything again, please make sure you let me know. Um, so visuals go a long way. I think I stressed that a lot in the last slide, but visuals, 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 or materials, materials, materials is another way to say it. Having something for your students to interact with and just engage in passively can really change the way your lesson feels and it feels teaching your lesson. It can help provide comfort to you as the teacher, and it provides a lot of comfort to our students. Learning is a difficult experience for anyone, and learning something new often brings out a lot of anxieties for people. So, having an anchor point for them to look at and ground themselves in as you're talking, and maybe your oral instruction is overloading them, but your visual is letting them process the information that they need. It's kind of why we often have activity time in classes, times for people to do a specific activity, because we want to let our kinesthetic learners have that consolidation time as well, right? Um, Good tools for visuals, Google Docs. WPS Office is a free office software. Discord I didn't put on there because you can stream all these things to Discord or to Twitch. And then Whiteboard. Whiteboard is a Microsoft extension that is literally a whiteboard. I don't know if you have seen it. Got it. Erase my whiteboard and then I will show you my whiteboard. I think it's a really fun thing to have. Stop streaming. Sorry, I'm going to stop streaming and switch my screen so that you can all see my whiteboard. And whiteboard is just a very quick and exactly what it sounds like. It's a free whiteboard for me to draw on and use to talk about That's an excellent question, Figwellen. That to me goes to our conversation on transitions. Um, in that as the teacher, you can have transition phrases or transition statements to try to get the class back and grounded. It's as simple as saying, I think this is a great conversation that we have going, but I have some things that I still want to cover. So we're going to keep going. You remember that in the instance, as much as you are still you, in the eyes of your students, you're an authority figure right now. So you have the authority over the time to say politely, right? We want to be polite and courteous to the people we're working with. Um, Thank you for your discussion. That was very excellent. We're going to keep going. And then you can come back to it later. Like if you have extra time at the end and they still want to engage in that conversation and that topic's really driving them home, then you go back to it. Then you bring it back up because that can help keep that engagement going. I am going to open my screen back up to the PowerPoint, everybody, again, just so you can come and join me again in that. I still have 6 viewers. Yay! It's nice to see everybody here. Visuals go a long way. My next big teaching tip is to be approachable. So a good practice to do this is to have a growth mindset. Walking into your class and thinking you're the expert, you're the god, my students can't teach me anything, and having a disrespectful mindset to your students isn't going to create a positive learning environment and isn't going to really help your students learn at all, right? So there's a phrase right now that we are using in education that is called a growth mindset. And it means to always be open to learning new things, even about something you thought you already knew, right? You could be an expert sewer, but have never worked with a particular sewing machine before. And so somebody could still show you new things or new settings about the latest model of sewing machine you didn't know because you've used your old reliable, you've got your system that works for you, and you can make beautiful garments. But you can still learn something new about sewing. You learn something new about that particular machine, right? There are so many different ways to classify new learning that if we just stay open to the things that are around us, often our students find us very approachable and want to engage with that because they're also learning. And so we're showing them that we're learning too and that it never ends in a good way, not in like a, oh my God, it never ends, but in like a fun, like happy way. Um, this phrase was said a lot and I actually really like it. We're the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. Um, at times, it can feel when you're standing up there talking to your students that you want to feel like you're that sage, that one above them, but we're not anymore. We know that doesn't work and that doesn't really foster great learning. We want to be the guide on the side and giving them the skills they need to get where they want to go on their journey and help them out. So if we talk about that needle felting or not needle those belt favor class again, our fictional belt favor class, you could teach them a lot of different skills just by teaching them how to make a belt favor that they're going to take and run with and do things that have nothing to do with the class, but they're going to remember your class and you're the one that got them started on that journey, right? You're that guide on the side, somebody there that they can rely on and seek help from, but you're not going to tell them how to do something. There's not a lot of wrong ways to do something. there's just good habits and bad habits, right? We want to foster good habits in our class. We want our students to think critically about what they're doing and why they're doing it, right? But can't change their minds if they're going to do something that's not going to be very effective. You can just try to warn them ahead of time. So we're giving them skills and tools they need to help their passion for the subject grow. I think that is a different way to say guide on the side and not sage on the stage. And I think my big final tip that we will spend time talking about is about not reinventing the wheel. There are thousands of lesson plan formatting things online that you can find if you really want to like a step by step checklist about how to format your lesson. Um, I didn't know if that would be very helpful because I don't know where everybody is on their teaching journey right now. Some people are struggling to find ideas where others have ideas and need to put the pieces together to make the lesson. And I'm happy to help anybody at any stage that they're on. But you don't have to reinvent the wheel and feel that you have to be the most unique teacher out there. The things that work for a reason. We need to lay the foundation of what we're teaching before we can really dig in deep and talk about how it works, right? We need to let our students approach the information in the same way that we were allowed to approach it, discovering it, learning it, getting excited about it, and that's that's not reinventing the wheel. That's continuing to foster our love and hopefully their new love of what we're talking about in teaching. Um, I wanted to open up the floor again. Oh, sorry, I did have another point. Look at me, not even remembering my full presentation. I've had a lot going on this week, everybody. We want to validate learning. So when people participate in our classes and we engage with them, we want to make them feel like they're being heard. And this kind of goes back to a comment that I made earlier about learning being difficult and learning a learning environment creating a lot of anxiety for students. who- Let's say somebody's being disruptive or being loud and there's a group of loud people in the back of our class and we're trying to really like engage with them, validate their learning, go over and see what they're doing and try to engage with them on their level and be like, that's a great idea that you had to use the paint over here like this or to try to do this, but you want to make sure when you're doing it you don't go wrong this way or you don't, right? Like bring them in and show them and guide them along with what they're doing, right? When students participate, say thank you to them. Thank them for their contribution because we want to foster inclusion. We want people to participate, right? Uh, these are there's so much that love that I have for teaching, and I hope that uh, even after this class, if anybody has any questions about classes they want to teach, I just want you to know that you're always welcome to reach out to me and ask me, and I'm happy to help you prep and plan to your heart's content and your needs to make it run as smoothly as possible. Um, are there any particular questions that people have about teaching, about organizing your class, about classroom management? So, how to deal when things get disruptive or off topic, like Faywellen asked already? Um, is there anything like that that people would like me to cover at this time? Well, Valiant, if you would like to, you're welcome to unmute yourself and talk. Same goes with anybody. At any time, you are welcome to unmute and just participate in conversation. It is whatever is easiest for everybody. Ah, we're doing attendance. Um, that reminds me, I should do my attendance at some point today. Okay. Um, I am coming to the end of the things that I wanted to cover in my beginners teaching class. So I just wanted to take the time to say thank you for everybody for attending. And I hope that this lesson has been something that you can take away with looking at teaching in a new, exciting light, that you're able to feel a little bit more comfortable about the questions you would have to ask yourself to prepare yourself for teaching, and think a little more critically in a good way about feeling more confident teaching in the future. Um, so if anybody has any questions, maybe not related to my presentation directly, but about teaching or anything like that, now's the time to ask. I am an open book and happy to answer any questions that you have. Oopsie. you speak?
Yeah, I'm thinking of ways in which I could run workshops via the internet,
Hmm.
um, which is considerably more difficult than things like lectures, because it's hard to make stuff with people. Do you have any suggestions for that sort of teaching through the internet?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think it kind of depends on what kind of workshop you're trying to do. You might have more success doing a tutorial where you set up your cameras and your angles to do a full on demonstration of the techniques and talk about what you're doing and why as you go, and then allowing people to complete it at their own time, right? That way you're not time constrained that a workshop or a formal class might have. You can do like a full hour long video of pausing and playing for each of the part of your video that you need to do, uh, and putting it all together that way. If you did want to run it as a workshop and be with them as they complete it, um, I definitely think the hardest part you're going to run into is materials and making sure everybody has the same materials, right? Materials and tools to work through your workshop. So try to find or be able to source materials at a cheap cost. So look at your dollar store, your Dollarama, and things like that, and try to figure out what you can create or teach using a low budget, because you'll want that class to be accessible by the largest amount of people, or even things that people could use around their home to help cut away on some of that need to buy anything. Um, Program wise, you'll probably want a webcam, and some sort of streaming software to be able to record and practice. Look at your lighting situation as well. That's going to be something that you need to be considerate of. You might need a desk lamp or some sort of overhead light to provide good lighting to your workspace so that people can clearly see what you're working on. I'm trying to think of that's probably my biggest piece, is making sure that your workspace is well lit and well be able to be seen from different angles, and you have the ability to demonstrate what you're doing even backwards, because they may be following along but doing it the other way. So you got to be aware of that. Um, did you have anything specifically that you wanted to do a workshop on? I might be able to more talk about ideas then. um,
Yeah, I had kind of gotten to the point where you were, where I was like, I had dismissed the workshop idea pretty much
hmm,
entirely for this, because it's not overly accessible. So I just got my eighth third of the dragon at our most recent court, whoop, whoop,
yeah.
for making little polymer clay scenes. So like little mushroom house, that sort of thing. Um, Polymer clay, as it goes, is not an overly accessible material. It's not super cheap.
No.
Um,
So there is actually a program that I know that mirrors polymer clay, that a friend of mine used to create a model of the frog's digestive system over the summer for school. It's called Sculptress. You might be able to find uh, you'll be able to find it online for free, and it's modeling and sculpting with the similar tools to polymer clay, but working from your computer to make like 3D models. You might be able to get similar results in a workshop style of thing where you guide a class through making something on Sculptress that they could then transfer the skills onto polymer clay if they wanted to go through polymer clay learning.
oh, that's super interesting.
Yeah, it's an excellent program, and you can create all sorts of amazing things. It has all the similar tools. There is a free and a paid version, but the free version has a lot of the things that you will likely need and can do. So, yeah, give Sculptress a look.
Thanks. That's super, super helpful.
You're very welcome. Are there any other people in here that have any ideas of what they may want to teach but are struggling to find resources or materials to really let them get at what they want to teach? Excellent. Just wanted to ask. Oh, we got Fubar typing. Okay. I think that's a great question. When you're trying to figure out how to teach and what encompasses that, that kind of goes back all the way to something that I talked about a little earlier, Fubart, which I can explain with this concept, backwards design approach. So you want to teach how to be a mask. So you got to start by thinking your pre-knowledge. What makes a good mask? What are the key things that a good mask needs to be able to do and embody and and that applies to all things that a mask might do. And then you want to break down those skills. So, how to be a mask might be 3 or 4 different lessons as you talk about character embodiment, as you talk about how to make a dynamic backstory, as you talk about how to improv and role play as your character in an inclusive way, right? You'll really be able to break down something like that's a really big concept into many different small lessons. That way people can walk away with a and you as the teacher have a good focus on your class. Does that make sense? Does that help answer your question? Awesome. Are there any other questions or comments that people have at this time?
More of a
Awesome.
comment.
Yeah.
I found the best way of helping someone learn something is find what they're interested in that's similar to it.
I think you're entirely right. We learn a lot through comparison, and when we can compare the skills that we're teaching somebody to something they already know, it really helps calm those anxieties and help the brain focus. So it
Hmm.
helps the student have an understanding of something that they otherwise wouldn't have. So that's a great point to say, Valiant. Thank
Yeah.
you for that.
Like, for an example, when I was in grade 9, I had a grade 5 reading level. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
the school I was in at the time, the teachers, they were there more for the rich and popular students. There was an
Yep.
investigation afterwards later on down the years. But there was an industrial arts teacher who was into D&D and board games, and I got involved with that. And then I started reading fancy fiction novels on my own. And within a month, I had my reading level up on my own past grade 9. But it was the love of something I was interested in that helped me learn how to read.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great story. And I think you're entirely correct that when we engage with our students and bring it to them and bring it to their level, we really get the most out of them. We want to
Yeah,
bring in the areas of interest that they have to make our area more accessible.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming to my class and talking with me. I'm going to hang out and around because I know we have some extra time right now to answer any of your teaching related questions. Uh, Next Adventure Academy comes up quicker than you think. And even before that, if you want to find an opportunity to teach, I am always available to help you organize and structure your lesson or find resources to bring and share your passions to those of us here in Amtgard. So thank you so much.
Thank you.